Economy Committee. Thank you all for attending. First of all, just a brief statement on the protocols to be followed during this remote meeting. Please note the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and a recording will be made available for public viewing following the meeting. And members, please mute their microphones throughout the meeting when not speaking. This is important because it helps ensure the quality of the audio for all present. Your microphone should be switched on when invited to speak and switched off when you have finished speaking. If you please use the raised hand button to indicate you wish to speak at any point. And can also ask officers to introduce themselves by confirming their name and job title before speaking for the first time on any item. If any members lose connection or have any technical issues during the meeting, please alert the clerk as soon as possible, either using the chat function within the meeting or by email or phone. I'll now ask the clerk to carry out a roll call of the elected members participating in today's meeting. Thank you, David, if you do that.
Thanks, Chair. If I can just confirm the members present. Councillor Benny.
I'm here.
Councillor Brisley.
Here.
Councillor Farmer.
Here.
Councillor Laurie.
Yep, present.
Councillor MacDonald.
Here.
And Councillor Thompson.
Present.
Okay, that's all members present. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. So there will be no apologies or substitutions then. Any declarations of interest? No. And there are no urgent items being brought forward by myself. Now, I'll indicate at this point, I have been asked if I could bring forward items 9 and 10 on Stirling City Centre Action Plan update and on Codebase. So what I intend to do is take them after item 5, the rolling action log. Is that agreed by everyone? Quite happy?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll now look at the minutes of the 23rd of September. If they are an accurate record of the meeting. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Is it agreed that's a true record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed? Thank you very much. We'll now look at the rolling action log. Are there any item, Councillor Benny?
Yeah, Chair, a couple of things. Just the first one, in terms of the capital strategy FE 227-18-221 on page 13. Just wondered if we could have an update on where we are with the members' briefing session on the capital programme. It's Jim. Oh, Jim, you're on mute there.
You're muted, Jim. Sorry. Yeah, Jim Boyle, Chief Finance Officer. So, I mean, this item relates to the 2021 programme, which is clearly passed by now. So, obviously, what we're developing now is a capital programme for 22-23 and beyond. So, I was going to suggest that this item's been overtaken because this one relates specifically to the 2021 programme.
Do you know, I think it'd be worthwhile updating all members on the status of the capital programme as it is, because obviously there's significant issues. Sorry, Chair. Sorry.
I was going to say, in actual fact, it was the update was for the current year 21-22. That was coming to us, but we'll see how we get on with it. It is on the agenda for today, Neil. So if we feel that we need a more in-depth briefing after the paper today, then we can arrange that at that stage. I think that would be, because, well, certainly I've expressed concerns in my discussion, so I did expect that there would be quite a discussion on this item today.
I would imagine so, Chair. I think, you know, this is one where I think all elected members probably need to kind of be brought up to date on where we are with these the sort of slippage from the capital programme over the COVID period kind of thing, because especially when we're looking at setting the budget in February, you know, I think members should probably have full awareness of everything that's gone on there over the last 2 years, because, you know, it is just about making sure that people are aware. But I take your point. We can have a discussion about that there. I had a couple of other ones. Page 15. FE 244, the Walls Monument Maintenance Strategy. I can't say I've seen one. Has that been circulated as passed me by, or because it says it hasn't been? That's Drew, I think, or possibly Brian. I can never remember.
Who's Drew?
Yeah, Drew Leslie, Senior Manager for Infrastructure. Just to update on that, Councillor Benny, we should have the programme plan just in the next, probably by the end of the month. I spoke to the building surveyor that's doing it earlier in the week, and it's just final market testing costs that for the programme maintenance plan. So we should have that by the end of the month.
Okay, so we should have that by the end of the month, right? Okay.
Yes.
The other one is the one immediately below it, FE 245, which I think is Stuart, regarding the Albert Hall investment programme. It said that there was a members' briefing arranged for the 4th of November. Now, I had to look back in my diary, because I will admit that I am not the best, most organised person in the council, which is probably an understatement, Chair. But I didn't see it in my diary. I haven't missed it, I don't think, and I haven't seen anything on this. It's also not on the agenda for today. What can we get a wee update on that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Stuart Oliver, Senior Manager for Economic Development and Communities. That briefing's put back. You've not missed it, Councillor. It was it clashed with the special council meeting that we had on the 4th. So I believe it's next week now. So it should be in your diaries. It's just been rearranged, but it is this month.
So I haven't missed it. It's next week, right? Yep. The delay in this doesn't impact, because I know that one of the issues that we had with sort of bringing the approval to the Finance and Economy Committee was a timing issue to do with various applications for grants. I don't remember all the details, but there was some timing issue. Sort of holding this over to the next meeting of Finance and Economy doesn't cause any problems with those timing issues, do they?
No, that'll be okay.
No, right, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the rolling action log? No. So we agree yes, there are some action for removal. So we're agreeing all that's on there. Good. We're now going to move to item 9. Stirling City Centre Action Plan. That's Keir.
Thanks,
You'd
Chair.
like to speak to this paper, Keir?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Keir Stevenson, Place Development Manager. So, committee are asked to consider and comment on this report, which there's 2 aspects to. First being an update on key actions included within the existing City Centre Economic Action Plan, which was approved in 2018. The second part being an update on the development of the new City Centre Strategy and Action Plan, which is intended to be brought back to Finance and Economic Committee in February 2022. Happy to answer any questions, Chair, or I'm sure colleagues around the call as well, if it relates to their service area. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Keir. First of all, are there any questions to Keir? Jeremy? Sorry, you're on mute, Jeremy.
Sorry. I had two. I was wondering about when the dementia-friendly city stuff would be finished, when we feel that we'll get to that point. The other question I had was about the free public Wi-Fi and how that would be funded ongoing. I just wanted to understand those two things. Thank you.
Keir?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor MacDonald. So the first aspect, the dementia-friendly infrastructure, I guess that's a bit of a rolling programme, so and it's included in the capital update report as well. We are progressing actions around the toll booth specifically. You'll maybe recall from the report to Council in February or March that there was specific actions around a number of public buildings. So we have identified some actions we can complete before the end of March in the toll booth. And we're working on actions within the city centre public realm area as well around dementia-friendly seating. So we should see some actions progressing over the next couple of months and completed before the year end. But that will be a rolling programme. There'll be additional actions we'll need to look at over the coming years and look at funding opportunities for them. The second aspect in the free public Wi-Fi, that has been managed by Go Forth Stirling, the city centre business improvement district. So that will be funded. The revenue costs are part of their business plan and will be funded by them. Obviously, they are coming to the end of their initial 5-year term, so we are looking at an exit strategy should they not get a yes vote in 2022. So that's something we're currently looking at.
Okay, just to clarify, so the dementia-friendly city is a couple of years to get everything done then?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of actions in there, you'll recall, so it will be an ongoing process and new things we may have to look at, but there'll be wider work, as we said, at full council in March as well, that there will be actions that the council will be taking forward on a regular basis that should meet the dementia-friendly principles, and so that will be an ongoing process, and we have, one of the key aspects was upskilling and training for colleagues and that take on the work and design on a number of aspects that the council does. So there has been training that they've undergone with the Dementia Services Development Centre, which is positive. So yeah, it will be an ongoing programme and an evolving programme, Councillor.
Thanks very much.
And I'm sure Councillor MacDonald will be kept up to date or briefings on anything that's going on, because it is an important area of work and something we're all very keen on. Councillor Benny and then Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yeah, the city centre strategy is there's some really good actions there, Keir. I think the service to commended on the way they've kind of engaged with us and the way we've been engaging with the business improvement district and the other stakeholders. I want to turn my attention a little bit more to the review of the action plan. I wanted to understand, in your recommendation, you talk about it's being development with key partners, and I was trying to kind of work it out, because I don't know if it was just a change in the way that the language was, or if there were actually two distinct groups here. There was a review group, and then there's a city centre working group. Now, is the review group, are these the same thing? Is, I suppose, my first question. Sorry, Keir, you're on mute there.
Sorry, Councillor. Yes, it's the same thing, but it's one group that are looking at the development of the new strategy. So I think the stakeholders are mentioned in the report there, so it is one group.
And it's 2.25. The stakeholders are mentioned there. In terms of the Go Forth Stirling Business Improvement District, obviously represents the business community in the city centre. But I just wanted to get some sort of assurance that that we are listening directly to the direct experience of traders there as well. I'd also like to understand, I suppose, thinking forward to the next city centre strategy and action plan in February next year when we come to look at it, I would quite like to hear from the working group directly on this. I mean, I can go and speak to them all individually, but if you were if you were planning on holding a session, that would be significantly more convenient and probably less of a burden for them to be contacted by all these different councillors asking, what's your opinion about this? I'd like to understand how you got to this. Is that your intention at the moment, Keir?
Yeah, I think we had a steering group meeting on Monday, so I think the topic of engagement with businesses come up, and the business improvement district, they are positively engaging with the businesses in the business improvement district in their feedback. So we did talk about the engagement with when we come up with the vision and the strategic objectives. We'll make sure that is discussed with businesses. I think it's a good idea, and I saw Stuart nodding and I see his hand up, but certainly we had the session earlier in the year with Professor Sparks, who is on the steering group. So I think it's a small steering group. We deliberately kept it that way to keep it focused, but I think that would be that's a positive suggestion, that we have an engagement session with members if that's desired with the steering group as well. So yeah, I would be happy to look at that.
Good. Did you want to follow on something on that point, Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, it was just really obviously to echo Keir's point. I think that's a really good suggestion of that kind of briefing, because of course when we bring forward the new strategy, it has to be a Stirling strategy, not a Stirling Council strategy for the city centre, which is the ethos of that group. It's, you know, what can all stakeholders do to try and make the improvements we need to improve and to develop the city centre. So hearing from that wider group, I think would be really beneficial to members. So happy to arrange that for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
That sounds like a great suggestion, Chair. Thank you. Sorry, I was just saying thank you, Chair, that's all.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I was actually going to raise a similar point as Councillor Benny. I've got three issues. The first one, on the same theme, Keir, we had regular meetings with businesses in the Golden Line by and large. And I guess with COVID, that's fallen to the wayside. But is that going to be reinstated, or are you having team Zoom meetings with businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Tom. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we had the city centre forum, and we had regular meetings up, as you're right, up until the point of the lockdown. So and a lot of that was intended in the business improvement district. They were started at the outset of the business improvement district. They certainly have, as I said earlier, they've grown in strength in terms of their engagement with businesses, and they operate online sessions, and they are doing meet the levy payer, meet the business sessions on a regular basis as well. So we didn't want to overload businesses with engagement, so the bid are primarily taking that on at the moment, but I think we're always happy to look at how we engage with businesses and other stakeholders in the city centre, and always open to suggestions on how we can do that. So we do need to have a discussion with the Business Improvement District about the City Centre Forum and whether there's a form of that needs to return. So if that's desired, then that's certainly something we can look at again. But at the moment, there's no meetings of the City Centre Forum scheduled in the diary.
Thanks, Keir, on that one. Yeah, I have to say, not everybody is a member of the bid. We're going to be careful to make sure that everybody's engaged. The second point, and actually this came up in the budget conversation, empty shops, Keir, about pop-up businesses and so on. Is that something you're actively looking at?
Yes, and you're maybe aware that there was an initiative that the Business Improvement District started, and that was a kind of Dragon's Den idea, where they would negotiate with private landlords about reduced rent for start-up businesses, and it was actually taken on by the Thistle Centre. So the dance shop that's located in the Thistle Centre was the outcome of that project. It was actually then led by the Thistle Centre. So the intention is to do a wee bit more of that, and it's something as well that the bid are looking to prioritise as part of their next term, which they're consulting on at the moment. Also, the Scottish Cities Alliance Task Force has that as one of the themes in terms of start-up and pop-up businesses to look at as part of the new City Centre Task Force and Action Plan that they're taking forward. So it's one that I'm not sure which council area is the lead in that, but it's certainly one that will be a priority in the coming years as part of that action plan.
Okay, thank you. And final point, I don't know if it's deliberate and you'll tell me it is, I'm sure. I'm quite impressed by the cafe culture that's developed in Friar Street. It's added to the vibrance of the area. Was that planned, or has it just happened progressively?
I think the action plan does talk about Stirling being a good food city and being open and welcoming to food and drink businesses. I'm not sure how much credit can be laid at our door. It's certainly positive to see, but yeah, it's I think King Street and Friar Street, we've seen positive developments there with businesses of that nature moving in. We've talked about that cafe culture was a key focus for Stirling. So yeah, I think it's about being a welcoming city, and I think that kind of business certainly fits with Stirling and the tourism offer and the public realm, etc. So I'm not sure how much we can take credit for that, Councillor.
We'll take as much as we can get. Thank you. Councillor Benny.
Yeah, Chair, I just wanted to come back in on that because it's actually quite an interesting point. I noticed a for sale / to let sign at the bottom of Friar Street on I can never say it, La Cocciara, the Italian place in the shop next to it, which obviously is a long established business in Stirling. But Ciara, in terms of the cafe culture, one of the things I was on King Street the other day going into one of my regular coffee shop haunts, and I noticed, I counted them, there are 12 coffee shops on King Street now. At what stage do we get a little bit worried about that? Because it's great, and actually, well, some of them are really good. I won't name names because that would be very unfair in a public meeting. But it worries me that we've got. At what stage do we start worrying that we've got too many? I suppose is the question there, Ciara.
I think a lot's been said, obviously, about where retail's gone in recent years and where it's going. So I think, first of all, as I think Councillor Thompson was saying, it's pleasing, and yourself, Councillor Bennett, it's pleasing to see that approach. It's been something that a couple of businesses, and well, some of those businesses we kind of mentioned, the kind of cafe-related businesses have talked about reaching the point of saturation. So I think it's probably about, as part of the new strategy, looking about how we attract more people into Stirling, how we develop footfall, how we make the city centre even more appealing and increase dwell time that just brings more people there, which brings more customers for those businesses. So I can't really have a level where we start to get worried, but I think it's certainly something that has been mentioned. But I think it's a positive thing that we've got that, and the market's obviously there for these businesses. They feel that there's demand there, so long may that continue. But certainly it's something that the bid are hearing from businesses as we are. So I think it's about, again, trying to improve the conditions as much as possible to increase footfall for those businesses and others.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, can we agree that we have considered and commented on the progress, and we've noted that the progress update about the new city centre strategy and action plan will be coming to Finance and Economy Committee in February? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We're now moving on to Codebase. Steve McDonald.
Thanks, convener. Steve McDonald, Service Manager, Economic Growth, Culture, Tourism and Events. This report provides the annual update on performance of Codebase Stirling against key performance indicators and requests a 12-month extension to the existing contract. We've got Barry McDonald, Codebase Stirling Manager, on the call to help with any questions, so welcome to Barry. The rationale for the contract extension is detailed in the paper, but essentially it supports the opportunity to tap into a national opportunity around tech scalers and will align with our ALI review and our new economic strategy. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Any questions? Councillor Benny?
Yeah, Chair. I just wondered, was there anything? Perhaps I was reading too much into it. Only looking at a 12-month extension. Is that simply a reflection of the current contract that we have, or is this to facilitate a longer-term commitment to Codebase and Stirling?
Stuart's got his hand up. I'll let Stuart come in.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so the 12 months is to make sure that there's proper time, now that we're at the end of the first period of contract, to review that. Obviously, as mentioned in the paper, Codebase have got some particular opportunities that they're in for at the moment that might impact very positively on Stirling should those come to pass. And equally, we're also doing the review and refresh of a new economic strategy and review of our partners and making sure they're all aligned at the moment. So for those two things, to enable those to be kind of concluded and resolved, if you like, and then to give adequate time to talk to Codebase about what that means, and then equally to investigate the different options there. But of course, as you'll see from the paper, we've had a very positive relationship with Codebase. They've brought a lot to the city and things are going very well. And for my part, I still think there's huge opportunity to do more and more there with that relationship. But obviously that'll be something that comes to finance and economy, you know, when we're looking at a potential longer term partnership, because members obviously have to have a view on that at the time. So it's just to facilitate all that work to happen and to allow that proper time for scrutiny.
Thanks for that, Stuart. I think the important thing that we kind of get across here is that the 12-month extension, you know, that we are actually keen on a long-term approach with Codebase to allow us and them to put investment into the shared facilities, etc. And I think that, you know, like I think from my part, you know, obviously the chair can speak for the committee, I'm sure, but the outcomes that we see here, you know, not COVID notwithstanding, are fantastic and exactly what we wanted when we set out for this. So, you know, I think the enthusiasm for entering into and continuing our long-term partnership with Codebase should be something which is communicated back to them.
Yes, certainly. I think that's extremely useful. And it was very interesting reading the report too. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of very positive stories in here and lots of great activity. And what I wanted to ask about was, in extending this or that future contract you're talking about, what new ambitions might Codebase and Stirling Council have in that contract? What sort of things would we like to do?
Anyone want to? Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I'll come back in. Thanks, Councillor MacDonald. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good opportunity now to work with Codebase and think, how do we take things to the next level? We can see from the report that from scratch, really, in terms of building up the facility and some of the community and the activities around that, it's been very, very positive. And in terms of entering into a discussion on what that new phase might look like, you know, it's a really, really strong base now. Lots of really good businesses, lots of really good partners involved. So I think that comes through discussion in terms of the next contract that we're looking at, in terms of where do we need it to go. Again, for my part, and what we've been discussing with Barry and the team, is how do we extend the reach out further from that central hub. You know, we've brought on some new facilities in around Stirling. There's more to come. So how do we take some of that work out a bit more? I think that's very important. But there'll be lots of different things like that and lots of opportunities. So maybe ask if Barry wants to come in. I know Barry's joined us for this item from Codebase. I don't know if you want to say anything, Barry, on this.
I was about to just invite Barry if you wanted to make any comments on what you've heard so far.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Barry MacDonald, head of Codebase Stirling. Yeah, I think what's important going forward, and it is For us, it's about the education piece. So one of the biggest pain points in the life of a tech startup is talent acquisition. And there is a nationwide shortage of, for example, software developers. So I think going forward, that education piece is really important. It's what I call a school to startup approach. So it is building on those digital skills and those education, so that Stirling then becomes a place where school kids learn about computer science, they study at university, or they go down the graduate apprenticeship route, and then they come back into the hub here in Codebase, they get employment, they start their own spin-out startup, and so the cycle continues. I think that's probably where the future lies. And in terms of, Stuart alluded to there, our ambitions to be the nationwide tech scaler, which is out for public procurement at the moment. That's very much a Scotland-wide approach. So albeit if we are lucky enough to win this contract, we will have a series of code bases throughout the country. It's very much our ambition to cover the entire country, regardless of whether you can access the physical hubs or not. I think if the last 18 months has taught us anything, is that the future for us is very much online. It's a hybrid model. And again, if we are lucky to win this tech scaler contract, I think the benefits for Stirling are fantastic, frankly. It connects the companies and the community in Stirling with their peers throughout the country. So yeah, we're keeping our fingers crossed for that one.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Barry, for that. And really interesting report. All the good work that's going on. Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, just to echo some of the comments earlier, that Codebase I see as central to our digital ambitions. We've got the digital agenda very much enshrined in our city region deal, and I think sending out the message to Codebase that we are very firm partners with Codebase, and we look forward to seeing Codebase thrive and grow within Stirling as we take full advantage of digital opportunities. In terms of the education side, I think that Barry, you were very reassuring there, because I think that's critical, especially within our disadvantaged schools as well, in terms of creating some new entrepreneurs for the future, if you like, in terms of digital opportunities as we move forward. And especially in relation to the underrepresentation of girls and young women in STEM subjects. And I know that you had, for some time, you had a particular girls event for coding, and I just wondered if that was very much still firmly on your agenda.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, the short answer is it's very much on our agenda. A lot of our digital skills workshops for under 18s, of which there were many, clearly took a bit of a hit during lockdown, although we did switch a lot of the classes online, and we created quite a large bank of YouTube content for kids. But now that we are in a position where we are returning to physical events, we are looking to reintroduce particularly the digital skills for girls event that you referenced. That will return, I believe, at the end of January. And just last month, we collaborate with Coder Dojo, who also teach young kids coding. They had their first in-person event a couple of weeks ago, so that has returned. So yeah, that's very much part of our plan.
Okay. Any further comments? Well, thank you very much indeed for that. And we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Yes, thank
Agreed.
you very much. We now go back in the agenda to item 6, which is the General Fund Revenue Budget projected outturn. Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. So the report sets out the latest set of projections for the General Fund for financial year 21-22. Again, as in previous reports, heavily impacted by COVID, and we have shown the COVID impact specifically, explicitly within the report. In terms of services, service outcomes, in terms of business as usual, we are reporting a slight underspend of 308,000. But the COVID impact, which all of this is obviously shown in Appendix 1, the COVID impact for the council in terms of service impacts is almost £5.2 million, and that's detailed throughout the report. But as previously reported, the biggest impacts are in terms of lost income. We also reflect a couple of decisions taken by council at budget time to fund one or two COVID items, specifically the purchase of Chromebooks and VMware from COVID funding. So that, again, that's detailed in the report. In terms of the overall COVID impact, which is 5.9 million, the funding for that is the allocation of grant of £4.5 million, and that's grant from Scottish Government that we carried forward, and an allocation of 1.427 million of reserves previously approved by the council for that purpose. I have noted within the report again the Health and Social Care Partnership impact in terms of the financial pressure, but that's really just for noting by the committee. That's not a direct financial impact on the council, and that has been reported through the partnership's own financial monitoring process, and will be dealt with, the funding of that dealt with through that process. So in terms of the reserves position, I'm reporting that the forecast uncommitted reserves at the end of the financial year would be almost £7.3 million, which will be 3.2% of budget, so in excess of target, but is in a downward trajectory from start of the financial year, which was £11.8 million. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions, as will officers, in terms of any specific service questions.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Benny, you were first to get your hand up.
I think I put it up while Jim was still speaking there. Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Just keen and enthusiastic as always. It was about the reserve position. There was a discussion about the reserve position at the Audit Committee the other week regarding the committed reserves as well as uncommitted reserves, and I was under the impression, it's probably one of these things where I've misremembered, that we would be able to have a proper discussion about our reserve strategy with some review items and with potentially looking at some decisions being made on those reserves at the Finance and Economy Committee. I thought we would be doing that at this one, but perhaps the finance officers can tell us when they'll be bringing forward proposals and a review of that our ongoing strategy on that.
Yeah, Councillor Benny, that will be coming forward. We're making commentary on that in the report that goes to Council on the 9th of December. There'll be further reports coming forward in advance of setting the budget in terms of the review of the earmarked reserves, which is the ones you're referring to, with a set of proposals to potentially redirect some of them towards the non-committed reserves. We clearly had quite a discussion about that at the Audit Committee recently, where we brought forward a report, and we undertook to carry out a further review and to bring that forward, not to this committee, but that will come forward to Council and to future meetings of the F&E Committee, but that will be done in advance of setting the budget.
Okay,
so is your intention, sorry, can I just clarify that, Chair? Is your intention then to bring forward suggestions for changes to our reserve policy as part of the overall council budget meeting in February?
Yes, but there will also be commentary to the council on the 9th of December. That our report on the financial strategy will be brought forward as part of that meeting as well. But final decisions taken by council at the budget meeting.
Thanks for that, Jim. I think, Chair, I'm absolutely, convinced, absolutely right that the council should be taking the decisions on this. I just wonder about whether there should be an opportunity for this committee to look into that and pass some comment on it to council. I'm just aware that council isn't always the best place for a long, detailed financial discussion, especially about reserves. And if we're going to be making any significant changes to our reserve position, that's probably better handled at this committee rather than in terms of then this committee making recommendations to council. I'd be interested in other members' views on that, Chair, if that would be appropriate at this time.
I'm just trying to think what date our next committee is. Will that be in
Chair, 17th of
January?
February. 17th of February is our last Finance and Economy Committee, Chair.
Right. So that, I think, can we discuss this offline, Neil? Because I think if it's necessary, we could either have a proper briefing session where, you know, it could all be explained to us, and if necessary, a special meeting of F&E, because it would be a bit late, the February meeting, to have any impact on, you know, on the budget or to recommend to council. So if we could figure out a way to do that in the most effective way possible. Are you okay with that?
I agree with that, Chair. I mean, I think that the point for me here really is that effectively the earmarked reserves. So the discussion that we had at Audit Committee, the earmarked reserves, there was certainly a need and a requirement from that committee that we would delve into some of the detail on some of that. And I don't think that the council meeting in February at the budget would be particularly conducive to going through each line of the reserve position. Perhaps committee isn't the best place for that either. I think what we do need to make sure that we're doing is we're delving into the detail of this, because I think in the past we've looked at our reserve position, and because it's been reasonably healthy, and because we, you know, all right, okay, we can make other decisions, we haven't necessarily gone into, as members, we haven't necessarily gone into that much detail in terms of what our expectations, objectives, and our required outcomes are from the committed reserves, the earmarked reserves rather. So I think actually having the opportunity to have a good, robust and detailed discussion about that with a view to setting our policy so that the officers have something to work to on that would be quite useful. Whether that's a sort of offline meeting where we just get stuck in about it, or whether we have a special meeting of the Finance and Economy Committee, I'm indifferent. I always prefer transparency on these things. Committees are better, but I mean, as you say, it might be better just to have the offline session about that. We can take this up offline.
Well, yes, I mean, it might be better to have an offline session at first, and then, if necessary, we follow on, do it formally at committee, because it would have to be the committee that made a recommendation, any recommendation to council. You know, okay. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. On page 23, 2.5, there's business as usual service pressures of £28,000 have been more than offset by 44k from in-year vacancy savings. And what I wanted to understand was the status of that vacancy and if it was still required. And I have a second question, which I'll ask next.
That's an economic development, culture and tourism. So that would be you, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor MacDonald, for the question. I would have to come back to you on the details, Councillor, in terms of where that is within the overall service. It's quite a big service, and I don't have the specifics, I'm afraid, and I don't think Jim will either, because he doesn't deal directly with the economic development division. But happy to get the detail and circulate.
Okay.
And second question is completely separate. So page 24, 2.13, it says business as usual pressures of 181,000 are anticipated in the area of children with disabilities. This area has had limited delivery from third-party providers, and I was wondering who that was and what we were doing about that. That's children and families.
Yes. I think Marie. Marie, do you want to come in?
Yes, I would, if that's okay. Marie Valenti, Senior Manager, Children and Families and Justice. There are specific providers that haven't been able to deliver on the services. It's largely home care for children with disabilities. It's not all of them. I'm pleased to say that we've seen that picking up. So it's got better over the last 6 months to a year. tends to be the smaller companies that have differed with that. The exact names of those I wouldn't want to speak about here for obvious reasons, but we are working very, very closely with our provider colleagues to support them get up to speed with those service delivery, but also to say that from the COVID recovery monies, we have been given money for an extra qualified social worker in our children with disabilities team. So we have a specific team that's specialist for those children, and we are actively attempting to recruit to that post. Over time, we expect to see the 75% of the service delivery slowly and gradually move up to 100%, but that will take time because, as everyone knows, there is a real shortage of home carers, not just for children's services, but also for adult services. But by way of reassurance, we're keeping a very close eye on all of this, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Benny, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, Chair, there were two specific questions that I had as well, and I put my hand down too early. Apologies. One was, it's probably for Marie again, unless Brian is here. I'm not sure. 2.17 in terms of the funding that we've secured from the Promise Partnership. I wonder if it's your intention to take a paper indicating how we're going to. There's some good. The objectives that are set in that do seem to work towards some good outcomes, but I think I'd like to understand how we're going to achieve the outcomes from that £50,000 investment. And I just wondered, is it your intention to take something to the Children and Young People's the Children and Young People's Committee?
Marie?
Is it all right for me to answer that question?
Yes, sorry, I'm asking you to come back in.
It's medieval 90 here, yes. Okay, yes is the answer to that. Councillor Benny, we are currently doing some analysis work on what is required for the Promise. So the £50,000 we got was for a Promise programme manager who's currently now in post, who's working very hard at taking things forward for us and doing an excellent job to date. And she was a qualified, very experienced qualified social worker in Stirling Council. So we have kept her talent within the organisation, which I'm obviously delighted about. So I meet with her monthly along with the service manager to review progress. So absolutely, yes, we will be bringing reports back to the Children and Young People's Committee on the progress of the Promise overall. We're currently doing a power of work on developing the Stirling plan for the Promise for 21-24. Not finished yet, but almost there. And that full plan will be brought to the, I believe it's the February committee next year. So happy to share all of that information with you, as well as any financial information.
Well, that's great. I'll see it when it goes on to the Children and Young People's Committee agenda. It's important that we keep an eye on that agenda because it's a very, very important one. And I'm glad to hear that. That sounds very positive. I just had one other question, and it's probably a very quick one for Bruce Reekie to answer. 2.32. What on earth is the compost plinth at the waste service depot? I was thinking my way around that. I can't think of anything that would be the compost plinth. What is that, Bruce?
Thanks, Councillor Benny. It's Bruce Reekie, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. There's a concrete pad to the north of the Lower Paul Mace site, Neil. It was formerly used for actual composting when we did that in-house.
Oh, yeah. So is that a particularly expensive thing to maintain?
We have some drainage issues in terms of the pad. It's a large concrete pad with drainage underneath, and there's some drainage works that need to be undertaken just to allow the flow of water from that pad, Neil.
All right, okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the report or comments? No. So do we agree the recommendations? Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We're now on to item 7, which is the General Services Capital Programme 21-22 Progress Report. Jim again.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the report sets out the latest set of projections for General Services Capital Programme. We have previously detailed some of the difficulties that we have in delivering programme in the current year, not least the supply chain and labour supply issues affecting not only our own internal projects that are delivered, but projects that are commissioned externally. And these are detailed in, there's further commentary in the report itself. The Appendix 1 sets out the detail of the projections, and it shows that the core programme projection is currently an underspend of 5.114 million, and the detailed reasons are set out throughout the report. The report also contains in Appendix 2 a set of proposals that officers have been considering as a way of advancing some spending to address partly address that underspend position or that slippage position, and Appendix 2 sets out a set of proposals totaling £1.44 million. Officers have been asked in the past to consider bring forward, we've variously described it as shovel-ready projects or quick spend projects, or projects that we can advance at short notice, and that's what Appendix 2 contains. There is a recommendation, recommendation 6 within the programme to refer this to council. I was also going to suggest to council should committee be minded that in order to get these expedited, and clearly there's a time pressure to, if we're going to carry out these projects, to treat them as environments within the programme, which would allow officers to move with them and to get them advanced as quickly as possible, rather than lose another 2 or 3 weeks worth of time. But that's subject to the approval of the committee. So if we treat them as environment within the programme, we can give officers the authority to get them moving now, subject to committee approval. I'm happy to take any questions within the report, Chair, as will other officers present on the call.
Could I, certainly when I had been speaking on this one and getting the, as Jim put it, the shovel-ready projects organised, because so that we could try to maximise spend, I would recommend to committee that we do as Jim's suggesting, and committee treat it as environment within the programme to get these things moving, because the weather's quite good at the moment. We don't know when it will change, and we do want to spend as much as possible. And there is quite a comprehensive list there of projects that I'm sure everyone has looked through, and certainly these are ones that I am assured that officers feel can be delivered within the timescale. So I would certainly recommend that recommendation 6 is approve that the projects in Appendix B be treated as environment.
I'll second that, Chair. I think it's important that we maximise the spend as quickly as possible, because it's extremely important and very worrying that we've got such an underspend, but it's understandable given the unusual circumstances we're in.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. There's so many of the things that were in the capital programme that, for no one's fault, just circumstances at the time, haven't been able to be delivered. So I'm keen that we deliver as much as we possibly can. Now, I'm not sure, Councillor Benny, if you were first. I'll take you first and then Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what you said there. I think there's obviously the risk of us, I wonder whether, in terms of what you're suggesting there, I just wonder if there's a risk of us spending money on things which haven't been fully considered in terms of their outcomes. I just wonder if the officers could maybe give us some assurance about that, because I mean it's not a specific recommendation. So I'm just wondering what it's not appropriate for us to ask what officers' opinions of a resolution that's been proposed and seconded, but is there a way we can get that kind of input, Chair?
I mean, certainly the list of projects are projects that were suggested by officers. I mean, it's not a list of projects that I've come up with out the top of my head. It was all projects. Officers were asked to come up with a list of projects that they were confident that the funding could be used in this financial year. And this was a list of projects officer came up with. And also, they are things that would have been next in line if, you know what I mean, they were already somewhere and being considered as the next priority. Sorry, Neil.
Apologies. I suppose, Chair, the question I really have here, because looking at the list of potential projects, I mean, some of them are in my ward, so I'm hardly going to disagree with them. But and also they do seem actually there's some good aligned claims. So priorities, they do seem there. I don't think they're half baked or anything like that. I think the officers have probably got something which have really quite locked down here. But I suppose I'm just trying to understand why there wasn't a recommendation to do that if they prepared this list of programme spending. But the officers haven't recommended that we do that. Is it to do with the competency of this committee, or what? Why wasn't there a recommendation to do that?
Well, basically, the recommendation initially was for it to go to council, and certainly there was a wee bit of debate being had around the governance, but Mr. Boyle's now clarified that. I had thought.
So we do have the power to do it?
Yes. I wanted to clarify, what did the committee have powers to do to save any delay? And I think the report was written in this way because the governance still had to be checked out. Mr. Boyle is now, he's recommending the change that it's treated as in a way that does allow this committee to take those powers.
Right. That's all I was asking, Chair, because I mean, if that's the case, then that's fine.
Yes. Councillor MacDonald, you wanted, Mr. Boyle, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, it was really just to clarify that point and really just to confirm the questions that were asked there. I mean, officers have been asked in the past on various occasions to have lists of shovel-ready projects. I mean, in this occasion, we have responded to that. We have put together that list in response to the magnitude of the level of underspend, and clearly none of us, are happy to see that level of underspend. So we compiled this list as a way of partly mitigating that. I mean, there are provisions within the financial regulations to have programme environment. So I think all we would be doing is exercising that in this instance, subject to approval of the committee.
Brian, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment. So Jim's answered the question, particularly around the decision making of the committee and the financial regulations, but it's just to give reassurance, Councillor Benny, on the project. So you'll see within the appendix the list of projects and sub-projects effectively are for all the forward plan on elements that are already within the council's capital programme that would be getting brought forward as officers for next year. And it's a particular list of projects that are easier to implement than some of the other projects that involve, building adaptations, planning permissions, building warrants, etc. So a lot of the infrastructure projects, the reason why we were able to bring forward such a detailed list is effectively they're the next priorities beyond what's already committed in the capital programme. So we can give you reassurance over if you like, the continuity of direction of travel from previous decisions of council and those themes that normally play into the programme, such as investment in roads, footways, street lighting, etc. And clearly there is an allocation within the programmes for this year, so it is environment. And just to remind committee that we usually do environments within year through the committee anyway. It's usually around the September meeting that we identify any opportunities to via because of underspends or delays in projects. So it's activity that the committee has taken before within its delegated authority.
Okay, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions and a couple of points I'd like to make. So I was going to ask about a couple of things. St Kesog's, when was that going to happen? The CO2 monitors, where are those going to go? And that's page 45 is what I'm referring to.
So I'm sorry, is someone able to answer that?
Hi, Convener, Steve McDonald, Service Manager, Economic Growth, Culture, Tourism and Events. I can come in on the St Kesog's question. Thanks for the question, Councillor McDonald. So we do have key milestones mapped out for this project. The next one being is to finalise the design for the project next month, by the end of December. So that'll be in consultation with the community working group. It's then kind of, I think there's a funding process that we have to go through to secure the match funding over next year. I think construction, according to our milestones, is due to start beginning of 2023. Although we'll obviously try and move that forward as quickly as possible, but that's just a chance to get the cost finalised and also get the match funding in place.
That's good to know. So I don't know if anyone can answer the CO2 monitors question. Where are those supposed to go?
Through Leslie, Senior Manager for Infrastructure, there's CO2 monitors throughout the education assets, and there's been a detailed programme of monitoring going on. So a lot of these things were installed over the summer, and the council are participating in a national review of how these spaces are operating. Obviously, with the situation with COVID, we've encouraged to naturally ventilate spaces, so that they're throughout the educational establishment.
Thank you. And I just to make a final couple of comments. A couple of things. So active travel, I think it'd be helpful to have figures on usage, understand how to maximise those. The Strategic Timber Transport Fund, I think we need to start preparing for the next fund that we're going to try and get. And the final point I wanted to make was I would welcome, yes, a discussion on the wider, the whole capital programme. I think that'd be helpful, a briefing on that. But also I was thinking, because we talk about climate change a lot, and there's things like EV charging and the CO2 monitors and the nature restoration fund, I think it'd be actually helpful to have a briefing on those environmental bits of the capital programme so we can discuss those specifically. So I don't know what you think of that, but I'm just making that request. Thank you.
Okay, that's something that we can think about. Councillor Benny.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, to go back to the CO2 monitors, but I did have a question about this because I understand there is a fund with regards to ventilation in schools. Is this coming from that national fund for ventilation in schools, Drew, or is this, where's the grant come from for this?
I'll have to check out, because I'm aware we've installed on that basis. I'll need to come back to you with clarity on that, because there's also third sector and community funds associated with that. So if I can come back to you with a bit more detail on that in the next few days. Tracy Mills has been...
You wanted to come in. Do you have an answer to that, Jim? You're on mute.
Sorry, that's twice in the one meeting, sorry. No, there has been funding allocated from Scottish Government specifically for this, and each council has received a share of that. So off the top of my head, I don't have the Stirling element, but there is funding that has been received for this purpose.
Okay, thanks for that, Jim. So yeah, that's fine. It'd be useful to know exactly which grant that came in from Scottish Government, because there was an announcement the other. I thought it was only the other day, but it might have been like 4 or 5 weeks ago, because I'm a little bit like that about money for ventilation in schools. Now I wondered if it was that fund or something else. I'm sorry, I've triggered Charlie. I think he's wanting in on that.
Charlie, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Benny. It wasn't actually specifically on that point. It was just in relation to the governance around the paper itself. I think if there's to be an amendment, if there's to be an alternative recommendation 6, there'll need to be an amendment so that that's properly captured in the minute. as to what committee are agreeing. And just to confirm Jim's point, and also which I think was backed up by Brian, a specific provision within the financial regulations which allows for veerment of from one budget to another, which I think is what the committee is proposing to exercise today. But it's just to make sure that the minute properly captures what committee are approving. I think that there will need to be an amendment to recommendation 6 to allow that to take place.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Well, certainly, I think the last part, to approve that environment takes place within the existing programme to allow the inclusion of the projects listed in Appendix 2. Would that cover it, Charlie?
Yeah, and I'll second that.
I see David was just about to come in there.
David?
Thanks, Chair. Apologies, I don't want to cause any confusion. I just wanted to clarify on the environment issue what the understanding is. According by my reading of the scheme of delegation, the environment over £250,000 is reserved to council. Environment up to £250,000 is a delegated function to the chief executive. I'm not aware that the committees have any environment abilities to carry that out. Is the suggestion today that the committee recommends to council that they approve that?
No, what we were hoping to do, is that environment in any particular project?
Specifically at 13.5 of the scheme, environment within the capital environment within the overall capital programmes greater than £250,000 is reserved to full council under 13.5.
Okay.
Environment up to £250,000 is a delegated function to the chief executive.
So you're saying, my understanding that the committee had the powers divided within the programme isn't correct?
Not based on my reading of the scheme of delegation, Chair. But
could we maybe get that checked out and come back to it, because I don't want to waste a lot of time arguing. Charlie, can you maybe check?
Yeah, Councillor Brisley, I was going to suggest that this matter simply be confined to later on in the committee hearing, which will give me a chance to have a wee look at that and speak to David offline.
Okay, that would be fine. So, if that, Neil.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I did have another question about the paper, if that's okay. Yes. Maybe I'll give Charlie and David a chance to have a chat. In terms of 2.19, the Major Flood Alleviation Scheme and the review of the National Flood Programme, I just wonder if we can get a little bit more detail about the review of the National Flood Programme. First of all, I wasn't aware of this, and in fairness, my ward's at the top of a hill, so it doesn't flood, so it wouldn't necessarily be the sort of thing that I would sort of pay much attention to. But the suspension of the suspension of uncommitted expenditure, is that uncommitted expenditure from the grants that we've received from the Scottish Government? Second of all, have they given us an indication of the timescale of the review for the National Flood Programme? Because I'm just aware, you know, it's reviews can have a tendency to become more elongated when,
Bruce,
especially when
you answer that one.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brisley, and thanks, Councillor Benny, for the question. It's Bruce Yuki, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. My understanding of the situation, Councillor Benny, is that across the National Flood Programme, there's been considerable overspends in terms of budgets. And that's obviously predominantly within the Cycle 1 funding, which a number of our projects are caught within. Obviously, as part of the review that they're undertaking, they're also looking at Cycle 2 funding pots as well. You may recall that when Cycle 2 was released, we'd actually put in the Aberfoyle flood alleviation scheme at that point in time as well. So the ask of us at that stage was to provide them with an update in terms of where we had committed and uncommitted expenditure, and all 32 local authorities have been asked for that information. At this stage, we had committed expenditure on some project work within the Stirling area. That has now been concluded. The second part of that was uncommitted at that stage. We also have committed expenditure in relation to community engagement exercises that remain ongoing at this point in time, both in Bridge of Allen and in Callander as well. So what we've based it on is very much about concluding, in terms of our projection, the work obviously in Stirling, Bridge of Allen and Callander. Anything beyond that would be deemed to be uncommitted. The review, as we were led to believe, was going to be a fairly quick review. That I don't think there's a final timescale. I would have to check out on that as well, though, Councillor Benny. But given the timescales and where we are at this point in time, even if we were to get a decision prior to Christmas, it's going to be very difficult for us to sort of mobilise within sort of January, February, March of next year. So the projection that we've given in the capital budget is very much based on those projects that have outlined to conclusion and then ceasing the expenditure there. It may be that we're able to do a bit more if we do get an early outcome of the review and we're able to move forward. But that's what I understand of the process at this point in time.
So can I ask, Chair, that the suspension of the funding, the suspension of the uncommitted reserve funding, the uncommitted funding for the flood alleviation scheme as a result of overspends on other projects elsewhere, is there a risk that we lose that funding because of the overspends elsewhere?
To be honest, Councillor Benny, it's too early to say. We provided the information that they're going to review, obviously, the funding streams, both in terms of Cycle 1 and in Cycle 2. And obviously, as soon as we have any outcome of that, we'll obviously be in a position to report back at that stage.
Jim, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a national issue that has led this pause and suspension of the programme, and Stirling has obviously get caught up in that. I know it's being considered tomorrow at coastal leaders, but it won't be resolved there. It's really just an update, and obviously SEPA have to give a view on any revised programme. So whether we, and I believe they are looking to do that by the end of the calendar year. That really doesn't give us really any clarity yet on what that revised programme will look like for Stirling. But I just wanted to just give a kind of sense of the likely timescales on this, that it may drift on certainly beyond the end of this calendar year, and whether councils will have clarity on the revised programme prior to setting budgets, I think remains a risk. But that's obviously out with our control as it's being considered nationally by Scottish Government. But yeah, there is a fair degree of uncertainty and does present risk to council. There's no two ways about that.
Chair, it strikes me that this would be something I know that when I come out of this meeting, the first thing I'm going to get from Councillor Earl is, well, what happened on the flood alleviation schemes issue? Could we possibly have a briefing go out to all members, specifically the members whose wards would be affected by these schemes? I'm thinking here the Dunblane and Bridge of Allen members, and the Forth and Hendrick and the Trossachs and Teeth members would probably be very interested in what's going on here, just to get that level of detail.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
It seems that the COSLA paper for leaders would probably be a good thing to circulate there if it's not in the private session as well.
Okay, we agree to do that. Now, thank you. Now, if that's all the comments and questions, etc., on this paper, have David and Charlie come up with any resolution? We know what the committee wants to do. The committee, I think we were agreeing that we would, if we, as far as I was aware, the committee was allowed to via within the programme. And certainly I've moved, and it's been seconded, that as long as that is correct in terms of governance, that we would carry on and do that. Is there anybody got any objections to that? David, have you got an answer for me?
Thanks, Chair. We have sent some emails. I believe Charlie agrees with the view that it is reserved to council to take any action environment over £250,000. That would also tie up with the financial regulations, which states that 5.12 that any environment within the capital programme in excess of £250,000 must receive the approval of council. So both the scheme of delegation and financial regulations suggest that we need the council to approve that.
Well, I am a bit annoyed about that because I did actually ask the questions, and was under the impression that we could do this. So I'll take that up out with the meeting because I am not happy, and it is a delay in the programme. Those 3 weeks might make a difference between money is being spent and money is not being spent. But if that is the ruling,
Councillor Brisley, sorry to interrupt. I'm looking at the scheme of delegation. Just wanted to check the remit of this committee, and it doesn't actually reference environment directly. I don't think, though. I'm doing this a little bit on the hoof, and I apologise for that. In relation to environment for sums under £250,000, that seems to be sitting at senior officer level as well as chief executive. So I think a view will need to be taken by officers on whether the environment is aggregated or whether we're looking at these individual environments of budgets. And I think perhaps Jim may have a view on that. But what I would suggest is that you don't make a decision just now until we have some clarity around that, and we come back in this meeting later on. So we simply continue this matter to later on, and we'll get some clarity around that for you.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, so my view is based on the financial regulations, which does state that only environments in excess of 250 be approved by council. And if you look at Appendix 2, there is only one scheme in there that's above 250,000, and that is the roads improvement line. The rest of them are all certainly below that level. So from that point of view, given what we've exercised in the past in terms of environments of values below that would be a decision, that would be a practice in relation to what we've previously exercised, that they would just be simply exercised by officers and reported in the next opportunity to the committee. So the list in Appendix 2 only contains one that's above 250, and that's the roads improvement. So my view would be that the others could proceed. The roads one, if it were to be amended to 250, could proceed if there's a desire to get that expedited quickly and get the schemes in place.
Well, I think we really need to look at it, because I think it's a farcical situation if it's a case that the committee cannot exercise any authority, but officers can. That just doesn't seem right to me. But again, I'll take that out with committee, and if it's a way of changing that figure for the roads to 250,000 to allow it to proceed, then we do it. But we'll come back to it later in the meeting. But I am, once we've had total clarity. Right, thank you. But all the other decisions, we accept the decisions that are here. Oh, now, is that Julia coming in? Julia.
Councillor Brisley, thank you. I've just joined the meeting because I was dealing with something else. This is a matter that we've just become aware of this morning, Councillor Brisley. So I'm going to suggest that I have a discussion with Charlie Haggerty, and I don't know if Jim's able to leave the meeting, so we can try and provide you I've not heard all that's happened. I've heard some of it. I know my team has given you advice, but just to be clear to committee that we have not seen or given advice on this paper in advance of this meeting. That's something we'll take the time to go away and look at just now and come back and provide you with some guidance, Councillor Brisley.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll leave that paper, that matter outstanding until we get the further clarification. And we'll move on to item 8, which is the Performance and Strategic Priorities Report, Progress Report. Who's taking us through this one? Isabel.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Isabel McKnight, Chief Operating Officer, Communities and Performance. The Performance and Strategic Priorities Report presents the recommended indicators and reports on their performance. The committee are asked to consider, comment and note progress, and there are officers on the call who will be able to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, any questions on the report? Councillor MacDonald.
I was just going to ask about thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask about the gross rent arrears, what we could do about getting the rent due. That's Appendix 1, Finance.
Okay. Stephen Clark. Stephen, you're want to
Thanks for your
answer this
question,
one?
Councillor MacDonald. It's Stephen Clark, Chief Officer for Housing here. In terms of the rent arrear levels, obviously they are higher. This is reflecting really a national trend. Obviously, some people are in quite difficult circumstances at the moment, and that is contributing to the level of arrears that are occurring at the moment. One thing that should help support us is that there has been a recent tenant grant fund launched by the Scottish Government to support us, to support people in arrears, to clear their arrears with their landlord. So that's something that's now open, and we've been publicising that to tenants, and that should help some of the tenants that have had a significant change in their circumstances during the COVID period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Isabel, did you want to come back in? No. Did you have anything else, Jeremy?
No, thanks.
No. Neil?
Yeah, Chair, I wanted to drill in a little bit into the trainees and apprenticeships numbers here. I mean, we've always had a fairly stretching target in terms of 6% of the workforce there, and it's sitting at 4.8 at the moment. I understand, obviously, there are obviously significant issues bringing trainees into the organisation at the moment. But I mean, what we have at the moment is a significant number of young people who are in need of position, and I'd like to think that we're in the process of renewing our push on this, and I suppose I'd just like to get some assurance from the service that the services that this is something that we're pushing towards to try and meet and ace this 6% target, because other organisations have much higher targets, so they're different natures to us, but 6% was always considered to be an achievable target, but we've never managed to achieve it.
Anyone want to, Isabel?
Yes, happy to respond, Councillor. Yes, you have my assurance that we're looking at both the apprentice programme and the graduate programme. We know there's difficulties across Scotland and the UK in terms of recruiting specific skills and talent. So that is part of our workforce plan. So you have my assurance that we'll bring something forward as part of the workforce strategy at the beginning of the next financial year.
Okay, Councillor Bennett. Yes. Any other questions? I don't see any. So we agree to note.
Agreed.
This is paper. Thank you very much. We're now on to item 11. No, we're not. Yes, it is. We're on to item 11, the Treasury Management Strategy. I think we need to leave that one, unless George, are you able to do that one?
Yes, I
After
can probably do that one, Chair.
Right.
It's George Murphy, Account Operations Manager. So very briefly, this report provides a mid-year update on the Treasury management strategy and activities. It presents the borrowing and lending portfolio position as at the end of September and summarises the Public Works Loans Board, lending terms and current interest rate forecasts. Point to note is that so far this year, there hasn't been any new long-term borrowing undertaking, and that's because basically we're holding a number of surplus cash balances at the moment. The reason for that is mainly due to the large element of COVID-19 grants that we received at the end of the year from the Scottish Government. We are currently in the process of establishing new counterparty relationships to increase the options we have for depositing these surplus funds that we're currently holding. We're looking obviously at the highest credit rated counterparties to prioritise security of surplus funds and looking at instant access and short-term notice products to maintain liquidity of surplus cash. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, George. Neil?
Yeah, George, it's not specific on the report. I think it's, as always, it's a well laid out and interesting report. It was always the case, and perhaps the contracts changed, that our Treasury management advisors would run a session for elected members to get a fuller understanding of the sort of economic position going forward to help inform our discussions on the strategy, especially in advance of the budget. I always enjoy those sessions. I think Councillor Farmer and I usually end up disagreeing about the nature of capitalism at them, and that's quite entertaining for both of us. But I'm sure members would probably appreciate that in the run up to the budget. Is that something which is already being organised, or is that something that we should be organising?
Yeah, that's something we can certainly try and organise. We can look to link Treasury Management Advisors and see if they can do a session. They're usually very accommodating in terms of being able to do that quite quickly and get that organised. So we'll certainly look at that, yes.
Okay, agreed that we do that. Thank you very much. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to item 12. Which is Stirling Technology Projects Limited, the annual report.
Yep, and I can do this one as well.
Okay, right, George.
So again, very briefly, this report provides an annual update on Stirling Technology Projects Limited. It highlights the performance during the financial year 2020-21. The report itself is attached as Appendix 1, and it outlines that the company's financial position remains sound, with rental income covering all ongoing liabilities of the company. The company's balance sheet continues to strengthen, with cash balances growing steadily and loan debt reducing year on year. A point to note is that the directors are currently considering various options for the potential use of surplus cash balances held by the company, and this will require them to take independent advice on that. Again, happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this report? Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Chair. Just with regards to this, the Stirling Technology Projects, it was always the hope and the expectation that the council, in front funding STP back in 19 Canteen, whatever it was, that STP would help to incubate and to build a cluster of pharmaceutical industries around about it. And I mean, I think actually there's been a significant amount of success on that. We have actually a not insubstantial pharmaceutical sectors in Stirling, which is to be really celebrated, especially because of the contribution they've been making over some of the COVID stuff around about that as well. I just wondered, does there exist somewhere, is someone responsible for an action plan, whether it's ourselves or the Innovation Park or the university directly, for an action plan for building that pharmaceutical sector from the Stirling Technology Projects investment? Where does that sit, and is that action plan still live and current?
Can anyone answer that question?
Sure, I would have thought.
Anyone able to answer that? Stephen?
Hi, thanks, Councillor, for the question. So we are looking at a number of options with the cash surplus that Stirling Technology Projects does have at the moment. I don't want to say too much because they're kind of being worked up as we speak, but we are looking at models where we can create a bit of an accelerator programme, also an investment vehicle for companies within that sector with surplus cash, but that's currently being worked up at the moment. We're kind of putting some criteria around that and some governance around it, so happy to keep members updated on that, but those plans are happening as we speak.
That sounds great, Chair. I'm not sure it's necessarily something that needs to be reported to committee or anything like that, but certainly I'd just like to keep a bit of in the back of my head what's going on with the encouragement of that pharmaceutical sectors around that. Thank you.
I'm sure Steve will keep you up to date with it. Is that okay? With that, do you agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. We're now on to item 13, which is the Health and Safety Policy Review.
Hi, hello Chair, it's Norman MacLeod here, Health and Safety Team Leader. So I'm going to introduce this policy paper. Chair, so yeah, the policy, the health and safety policy was due to be revised, so we've carried out extensive consultation with interested parties across council, and in particular with the legal team, to make sure that the policy remains legal and robust. What we've done, the old policy has stood us well, but we've revised it in the sense that we've shortened it, whereby we've split the document, where we still meet the legal obligations with the policy, but there was quite a lot of detail. It was quite a large policy, so we took out a lot of the prescriptive detail from that and created a guidance document that will lend itself better for management teams and employees, so they understand the clarity around what's expected of all of us around meeting our health and safety management obligations. So checked in with legal. We know this document will remain robust. It was robust previously. We've just tailored it a bit today. Just to make it more readable and clear for people to understand what's expected at all levels across council. So pending approval, that will get rolled out across council. There'll be a suite of support materials to help management teams do that in the form of toolbox safety talks, because we've got a large peripatetic workforce. So we need to make sure it reaches everyone. So we'll be doing it via PowerPoint, we'll be doing it via toolbox talks, and that guidance document will form a suite of support documents for management teams, so everybody fully understands their obligations for health and safety across council as we move through this pandemic and beyond. As we know, health and safety has been very much in the public eye and the workplace over this pandemic, so I think it's right that we just tailor it a bit and make it easier for people to understand where their responsibilities sit, so we meet that as a council, and that's me. I'm happy to take any questions on any part of that. Thanks
very much, Norman. First of all, are there questions? Councillor Benny.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just on this one, Norman, this seems like a good development in terms of bringing this, getting this more tight. And as you say, it's I can completely see where you're coming from on this, so it's entirely fine. One thing that come up, Councillor Dodds, who's on the health and safety panel, had mentioned to me that I think he's got a bit of interest in how you're communicating this with the workforce, whether it's little pocket guides or toolbox talks or something like that. And it just struck me that that'd probably be something that'd be worthwhile just keeping the members of the health and safety panel, appraised of and briefed on. I'm sure that was something that you were thinking about doing anyway, these kind of wee ready reckoners, and you already mentioned that you're kind of doing that. So I think it'd just be useful to just keep them on that page so that they know roughly what you're doing, so they can continue to get the full assurance that the council is taking its health and safety responsibilities absolutely seriously, because that's it's all of our responsibilities to ensure that.
Yes.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, there's a paper gone just last week for the health and safety panel upcoming in the beginning of December, and there will be dialogue, and I'll be speaking back to that there. So absolutely, yes, we'll keep everybody abreast of developments around that. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, just two things. I just wondered, first of all, how do we monitor that issues aren't being missed and that reporting is encouraged? Is the first question. And then I have a clarification point that I just wanted to ask about on page 147, but I'll start off with that one.
Really, what we do, we carry out audits across council, councillors. So we do, what would you call them, snap audits to go in and make sure that people are meeting their legal obligations, and we report those back to the Operational Governance Board, so that the senior management team are kept assured that across the council where those legal obligations are being met. So we do it via audit. We do some of the what we call them high risk services, you know, the front end services, operational services are also audited externally by British Standards Institute. So we dovetail our audits across council as part of their audits. So we're getting that outside eye looking in on our high risk areas as well as we're looking internally. So, and we report those back regularly to OGB.
Okay. And my second point was on page 147, it says highlight and report perceived health and safety risks and issues pertaining to their area of work, their line manager management team, so prompt corrective parental action to be taken. I agree with that completely. But I just to say, and I haven't worked for the council, I've worked in other places, I've seen many occasions where that trip hazard has been, people walk by it, there's that pool of water that managers stare at and think somebody should do something about that. And I think the point I'm trying to make is, how do we communicate that if you see something, it's everybody's responsibility, that things have to be, you actually stand there and alert people to it, or you get a mop, or whatever you do it immediately. And it's literally everybody's responsibility, whatever level you're at. If you see something, other people might not see that issue, that you alert people to it and get it fixed.
I think Norman said that in his introduction, that health and safety was everybody's responsibility. So I think that's quite clear. Isabel, did you have a comment you wanted to make on this one?
Yeah, it was just to augment Norman's response in terms of the wider workforce. So each team at their team meetings should have a standing item around health and safety, and that's part of Norman's monitoring. So, and that would go through anything in relation to health and safety, near misses, incidents, also risk assessments. So there's a huge audit function, given that we've been, as Norman quite rightly says, we've been through a pandemic for almost 2 years now. That is continually a moving feast for staff and can feel particularly onerous. However, it's really, really important. So, and the other thing was our recent BSI was very complimentary of our health and safety, our approach to health and safety, and dovetailing with BSI requirements in relation to our new policy.
Thank you. Bruce, was there something you wanted to supplement in this?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brisley. It's Bruce Rickey, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. Just picking up on Councillor MacDonald's point, absolutely, that we're asking people to take action or to report issues as well. But what's important is that we actually create a feedback loop in terms of that as well, Councillor MacDonald. So if people have told us about something, they've reported it, we can say that we've investigated, but we've fed back what the improvement actions were on the back of that report as well. And that's something that we're actively encouraging across the services.
Thanks very much, Bruce. I think that's important. People take the time to report things, to get feedback. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, it's kind of on the same subject, Norman. I don't know if it ought to be in this document, but site place inspections, formal trade union stroke management inspections. And second point, and it's maybe me, page 149, the very last element, I can't make sense of the last sentence. Maybe there's a few words missing, Norman. You maybe want to have a look at that and just... It doesn't have to happen here. It could be after the meeting.
Yep, I'm happy to pick up on that, Councillor, after the meeting. Yeah, we can fine tune that if that's something you feel we have to just clarify on. Yeah.
Okay. To agree to, so no further comments, we agree to approve the revised health and safety policy. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We're now on to item 14, which is the budget conversation Charlie, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Brisley. Jim and I are back in the meeting, and I think we do have a hopefully a resolution for the issues that rose in relation to item 7. If you want to go back to that, or alternatively, we can wait to the end.
I think I would like to see it being resolved. So if we go back to it now. Right, Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. David Meadow was absolutely correct in his reading of the financial regulations and in his reading of the scheme of delegation. The power to veer budgets up to the sum of £250,000 sits at senior officer level in terms of paragraph 511, and thereafter it's a power reserved exclusively to council. Having looked at Appendix 2, there is only one budget which is in excess of that. So what I have done is I have put a revised recommendation into the chat for members to see, and effectively it reads to note that officers will exercise delegated powers under paragraph 5.11.1 of the financial regulations to approve veerment of the budgets as detailed in Appendix 2 of the report, with the exception of the road resurfacing budget, which committee is asked to remit to council for a decision in terms of paragraph 5.12 of the financial regulations. And that keeps the recommendation in line with the council's governance documents, but it also allows the matters that members are keen to progress to be progressed and reported back to council or to F&E.
Do we agree with that?
I just had a question.
Did you have a sorry? Did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. In the previous discussion, the officer was expressed doubt about whether that was for individual project, a cumulative or a totality of 250,000 or individual. So can I just clarify what the situation is there, because you expressed doubt?
Yeah, having looked at it again and given what veerment actually is, it's the transfer of budget from one budget head to another budget head. I'm satisfied that it's not an aggregated total, that you look at each individual budget line and that power applies to each individual budget line on its own and not to the aggregate of all budget lines, Councillor MacDonald.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, Chair, you made comment earlier that things could be delayed by this. Charlie, would it be okay to spend up to £250,000 on road projects and then seek the permission later? We could lose valuable time given weather conditions, etc.
I think that's. So I think Brian's going to come in this one, but I think that is a feasible way to approach it. But Brian has already indicated that there isn't going to be a delay in this one if this comes to council in December, because I think the programmed works and the road resurfacing projects aren't due to take place until January. But Brian can perhaps confirm that.
Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Charlie. Yeah, absolutely. So officers are obviously preparing on the assumption that the programmes would have been agreed at some point, but Councillor Thompson, the current roads programme is obviously programmed in advance. So for the next 6 to 8 weeks, the programme is already set. So even if the decision had been taken today, that work wouldn't have actually happened until mid-January, February and March. So officers will continue to progress proprietary work for the road schemes, but the decision on the 9th of December would be sufficient to allow us to then complete that work. And I think it would keep the decisions in line with the governance, given that officer recommendation is to via in excess of the 250,000.
Okay with that, Jim? Neil?
Yeah, Chair. In terms of the road resurfacing thing, though, what I don't quite understand is that the council passes a budget which indicates the total amount of money that we're spending on road resurfacing or the road improvement programme or whatever, budget heading, whatever we're calling it that year. We don't say that we're going to do the C83 Easterton, Homage Road at Carron Reservoir. That's not what is decided at the council budget. It is effectively delegated to officers to divvy up that 5 million or however much it is that we spend on roads that year. I know something goes to environment and housing, but I always thought that was indicative to allow for operational changes. You know, I mean, when I looked at this, I'm like, well, they've already got power to do that. Why do they need extra power to do it?
Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment. Again, thanks for the question, Councillor Benny. You're right, a budget setting process, because of the size of the roads programme, it's not possible for the detailed list of schemes to be provided, but that's reported into the first meeting of Environment and Housing Committee to agree effectively with that overall programme. So that's the way it's done. The reason why we're able to specify the list of schemes that would be undertaken by the additional allocation is effectively we went through the list that are the next priorities effectively for next year's funding, as I said earlier in the call. So that allows us to specify to members not only what the money would be spent on, but actually the projects that would come forward.
Sorry. Let me just clarify the question. The Environment and Housing Committee, does it approve the roads programme in that way, or does it merely endorse it or note it?
It approves it. Sorry, Councillor Bennett, for cutting across you there.
Right.
It approves it, and our officer paper for budget setting sets out the investment level and confirms that then the report would be taken to the subsequent meeting of the Environment and Housing Committee, which is usually in April, to agree the programme across the various strands. So it's usually that one and things like the road safety programme, etc., that's agreed.
Right. Okay. But I think that's something to keep in mind for future years, that we may want a little bit more operational flexibility in those budgets. So when we're asking for decisions, or when Environment and Housing Committee is taking decisions at those meetings, that it's taking them in such a way as to allow for operational uncertainty, for the potential for a project to fall off, because sort of tying ourselves up in knots and governance doesn't help anybody, as we can see in this discussion. It's important that we get these governance decisions right, but when we're making the decisions in the first place and the recommendations are coming forward, we should be trying to keep in mind operational flexibility when we're taking those decisions.
Okay. Bruce, did you want to come back in?
Thanks, Councillor Brizzy. Brian's covered off a lot of what I was going to come in with there, but just in terms of Councillor Benny's question as well, it was just to say that we are moving towards 3 to 5 year planning cycles within the roads programme, and obviously street lighting and our other assets as well, and obviously that will have that inbuilt flexibility and obviously the visibility of those forward programmes as well, Councillor Benny.
Okay. Right, so I think we've got some clarity, and I would suggest that in the conversations part, Charlie has put a proposed revised recommendation 6, which is to note that officers will exercise delegated powers under paragraph 511(1) of the financial regulations to approve environment of the budgets as detailed in Appendix 2.1 of the report, with the exception of the road resurfacing budget, which committee is asked to remit to Council for a decision in terms of paragraph 512 of the financial regulations. So we're, just to clarify, Charlie, we're remitting it with a recommendation that Council approve it.
That could be included to ask to remit to Council with a recommendation for approval for the roads resurfacing budget. I can amend that, and if that's right, what's required.
Thank you. Are we agreeing that? Yes.
Agreed.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll get that revised, slight revisal over to David for inclusion in the minute.
Thanks very much. We go on to item 14 now, which is the budget conversation. Is Paul here? No, it's Adam.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Adam, you want to take us through this?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Adam Bowie, Business Planning and Performance Manager. This report presents the findings of the budget conversation, public consultation we held for 6 weeks, starting 20th of September through to the 1st of November. Public engagement was principally by the Council's Engage Stirling online platform, with paper copies, hard copies made available at libraries and other outlets. Basically, the report asks the committee to note the findings of the budget conversation and support the use of these findings in the budget setting process. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, first of all, to Adam on the report? Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, I'm muted. Apologies. Yeah, it's an interesting report, well laid out, understandable. But do you think the numbers that have responded is statistically significant, and we can use that information?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, for your question. Yes, there's a short explanation about kind of statistical reliability and representation in the report. Yes, we believe we had a really good response this time, better than other years, as I understand, with over 500 responses. And this is above the kind of recommended minimum statistically of, I think it was cited as 383. So we're well above that, and it's a good consultation and representation of views.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, it's an interesting report. It tells some interesting stories, and I do wonder about some of the things it's thrown up. And for example, it says doing things differently. That people think we should do things differently, but we don't really know how. And I do wonder about the asking people what services they value, and they want to get rid of, the public would get rid of births, deaths, and marriages for registrars, licensing for taxi and alcohol, and so forth, which is a bit concerning because these are statutory things. I wondered if it wouldn't have been more appropriate to actually ask about non-statutory services that they value rather than statutory services that we have to do anyway. We can't just give up on taxi licensing. That's not reasonable. So I wondered if you had any comment on that. And I've also noticed in here that benefit services are not really that valued. Is that building a case for using the third sector again? I mean, lots of interesting questions are thrown up by this report.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Really good question. I think our aim of the survey at the outset was to get people's views, excuse me, on what they value and then what they want the council to prioritise. So it's quite a juxtaposition, if you like, of that. So I think it was really just a kind of open asking our residents what they think is important to them, and that's really important for us to understand in the budget setting process. But Isabel and Jim may have some further views on that.
Okay. Any further questions to add on? Do we agree the recommendation? Do you want to come back in, Councillor MacDonald?
I'll take my head down now if I can.
Right. Councillor Benny.
Sorry, you were just about at the end of do we agree the recommendations, because I don't. I think this is a useful and interesting report, and I think it is useful insofar as it tells us what it tells us. And I think I take a lot from it, and I'd like to thank the officers for undertaking all the work on this. It's a very well put together report. My problem is the recommendation with regards to supporting the use of the budget conversations finding in the 2022-2023 budget setting process. What I'm trying to avoid here, and I mean, there were a number of complaints, not complaints, but people commented to me about some of the questions in regards to the thing on page 163. The council reduces or even stops delivering some services to protect other services. I wouldn't like to see that, and this is the reason why I don't support the second recommendation. I wouldn't like to see that used as justification for things to come forward to cut some services over others, to do what it says in the statement, to reduce or stop delivering some services, protect other services. Just because people say it in principle doesn't mean that they agree with it in practice when it comes down to the brass tacks of what's actually being proposed. And until we have a consultation which is on actual proposals, I don't think it's appropriate for us to specifically and directly use the findings of this survey in the council's budget setting process. And that's my concern. So I can't support that element of it. Like I say, I'd like to thank the officers for it. I think it's useful and interesting, but I think I would be worried about supporting the use of the findings in the budget setting process directly within a council, within a committee decision, principally because of the risk of that then becoming, well, this is what the budget process told us we should do. So that's where I am with it.
Well, you see, I read it slightly different from you, Neil, because support the use of the budget conversation findings in the budget setting process. I mean, to me, that means look at all the information that we've gathered, and people will interpret the findings in slightly different ways. And it doesn't mean take it exactly. And I don't think it means take it exactly. If people said this, that's exactly what we do, because there's usually a range. And I think it's using it to inform the budget process, and I think informing us and using it, there's no point consulting with people if we don't use the information we get in some way. Otherwise, it's just tokenism. But it doesn't mean strictly follow absolutely everything that's said. Because Jeremy pointed out some people didn't value certain statutory services that we have. Now, we've got to provide them. And I think the main thing is we take what we can out of it, and in certain cases, likes of that example Jeremy gave, you let people know, well, sorry, we didn't follow your advice on that one because it's a statutory service. So as long as we've got reasonable explanations for the things that we do take and the things that we don't.
Exactly.
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But I didn't take it strictly, Neil, the way you did, that we must use everything we've been told. What, have you got any response to that? Scott, you want to come in?
Yeah. If I could come in, I think, Neil, you're exercising too literal an interpretation over the recommendation 2, because it's not like a direct poll where the majority wins over a particular view. It's what we need to do is we need to look at the findings of the conversation, take into account what the views are saying, but also while we're considering those, we may well disagree with some of the opinions that come forward, and that's fine, because it is a conversation. It is not about having some sort of direct input from the public to say, well, we don't like this service over another, so therefore that's what would happen. That's not the case. What would we do is give it a due consideration and taking into account what the public have said, but also it's about the budget feedback as well. Is to say, yes, we did consider the findings, and these are the reasons why we did A, B, C, and this is the reasons why we didn't do D, E, and F. So to me, that's it's perfectly fine in terms of we are supporting it, the use of the findings, because as Margaret says, if we ignored the findings, then the question is, well, why did we engage in the first place?
Chair, if I can come back on this,
Yes,
I mean, my
Neil,
concern here, if I can if I can outline what my concern here is, right? Because Scott's absolutely right. There's no point in doing a consultation if we're not going to listen to it, and we should listen to it, and we should put it into its proper context in terms of the number of responses. And I think actually the report does do that quite well. My concern here is in terms of the specific decision to use it as part of the budget setting process. Now, if I take two things, if I were perhaps, so we say if I were particularly desperate to close the toll booth, say, right, I could take page 162. Only 18% of respondents valued culture, tourism, and leisure, and the majority of respondents thought it was either agreed or were indifferent to the term the council reduces or even stops delivering some services to protect other services. Therefore, that can be used as an argument for the closure of the toll booth theatre, right? Now, while that would be one element of the argument, what I don't want us to be in a position of is having proposals like that coming forward, which are then backed up by this document, because I think it's actually the people who've responded to this document would probably be quite disappointed if their responses were being used in that way. So what I'm trying to guard against is the responses being used to justify decisions when they can't really be used to justify, well, not decisions, but recommendations, when they can't really be used in that way. And that's where I'm getting concerned by this, and that's why I'm a little bit suspicious of supporting the use of the budget conversation findings in the 22-23 budget setting process. I would be entirely content if we were talking about circulating the results of these to all members to ensure that all members were cognizant and had seen the results of these in the run-up to setting the budget. But what I'm concerned about is statements being made in the run-up to that budget setting process that justify recommendations that are coming forward to the council in the light of this consultation, which are only able to do from the extrapolation of different things, which are not necessarily specific. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. Because the document is a public document. You're suggesting it gets circulated to all members. The information used in the budget conversation will be used by people to justify whatever they want. You know, if they want to justify your example, closing the toll booth, they'll point to something, a figure that's there. What I'm saying is it's perfectly reasonable that we'll look at it in its totality. You know, because there's certain things will conflict with other things in other responses. So it's our job to try to sort it out and look at it, use the information we've got, and as decisions that we're taking decisions, refer back to it. Say, well, what did the public think about that?
I think you're right, Chair. I think we will.
And it'll give us a guide.
I agree. I agree. I think we will. But I don't think we need to have a specific decision of this committee to do that. I think a specific decision requires us to relate, will require officers effectively to relate recommendations that are being brought forward to the consultation, which I would be comfortable with if the consultation included specific recommendations with regards to what we'll be changing in the budget. But in terms of more general statements being related to potential reductions in services or changes to services or policy growth items for that matter, I am not so comfortable with that being done on an institutional basis. I think you're absolutely right. People will do that. I'll do that, probably. We'll all do it. But I think I'm just uncomfortable about it being a decision of the committee.
Well, I still think that's
I think it's
a good use of
well.
the information. Jeremy, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I just had a thought. I mean, I think, yes, it's a really interesting document. It's told us lots of interesting stories, as I said. But actually, is this not a case for further piece of study that actually gets more specific about the policies that Councillor Benny's talking about, the actual proposals of what we could chop and change and do and grow and shrink and so forth, and actually be a bit more specific about a few of these items. People are very concerned about waste services, so why? And let's dig into that, find out a bit more. And actually, which non-statutory services do they value most? And just be a bit more specific. So this is a great basis, I think, for a further piece of research, because if you use this, Councillor Benny is right in the fact that you're then talking about, are you going to be able to draw a line between what's on this report and actually what appears on the budget? So I don't see it as reject what we've got here. I see it as this is a great piece of work that maybe is the door for another piece of work. That's my...
Well, I think Isabel.
Yes, would it be appropriate for me just to come in and maybe explain the kind of next phase of the conversation I think that we need to have? Sorry, Isabel McKnight, Chief Operating Officer, Communities and Performance. I think where we've let the public down in the past is we have not went back to them in a kind of you said we did scenario. And I think the other deficit for us is, and it was very difficult for us to explain the statutory and the discretionary services that councils provide. So I think there's a second phase to this that gets back to the public and says, this is what you told us, and this is why, for example, we can't, for example, if you look at what's valued and prioritised in terms of services, adult social care comes fifth. Well, we have a statutory obligation to deliver adult social care services to our most vulnerable. So I think that's probably at the next phase that maybe explains things a bit better, but it might have been more useful for us to have had in the recommendations that some of the information here would inform the budget process, the budget setting process, rather than use, because I think there is a phase two, if you like, in terms of us responding to the public. I don't know if that's helpful. Thank you.
Does that clarify things if we said support the use of the budget conversation findings to inform?
Yeah.
Just to add to inform.
Yeah. I think that in a way, Chair, that makes it worse. I think that exacerbates the problem that I've kind of raised here. I think it's important. I think Isabel's absolutely right. It's really important that we get back to people, because one of the failings of the previous procedures that we've had has been that we've not got back to people and we've not kept them informed and abreast of what we're doing. And I think, you know, there is a lot more work to do in terms of the statutory and the non-statutory. But I would go beyond what Isabel says in terms of the social care. The reason that social care always kind of gets left down there is because it's a minority of people who interact with that service. And they're quite a vulnerable minority, and some of them are very difficult to reach in any kind of consultation. So their voices aren't necessarily heard, which is why the 23 elected councillors are supposed to take public consultations like this, balance that against the statutory requirements, but also the requirements that we know, the information and data that we know are issues within our community, to then do that. And I think that, I mean, I think that in terms of all the different bits of information, I know that the social care data and demographic data helps inform our budgets significantly, because Isabel and I have spoken about that regularly. And I think that to me is a far more useful thing to say that we endorse being used as part of the budget process. I think the budget process has a lot of different pulls and pushes on it. I think that this one, it will be a pull and push on it, inevitably. But I don't see the need to put it into a decision that this document will be used, or that this consultation will be used, where we're not doing that with other documents and other sources of information. That worries me a bit. So no, I mean, you know what? I mean, we can just vote on it, Chair. I mean, I'm just going
to say, I'm going to move the recommendations.
Yeah, and I'm happy to second the recommendations, because, you know, we must be seen to be acting on the information and feedback that we're getting. Otherwise, it becomes the whole process would be brought into disrepute if we didn't sort of if it didn't inform our decision making.
Okay, and Neil, you just, is it, what do you want to What's your
I
amendment?
mean, whatever's easiest, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to note the findings of the budget conversation, and I think I'd like to make sure that we are getting back to people to allow them to understand what's happened with that. But in terms of an amendment, I haven't crafted anything, so I think it would probably be easier just to just for us to say that we want the deletion of item 2.
Right. Okay. David, do you want to take us through the vote?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I just check? There is a seconder to Councillor Benny's amendment.
I'll second.
Thanks, Councillor MacDonald. Okay, so we have the motion by Councillor Risley, seconded by Councillor Farmer, to move the 2 recommendations in the report. The amendment by Councillor Benny, seconded by Councillor MacDonald, to move only recommendation 1 within the report. So voting first on the amendment from Councillor Benny, please indicate for, against, or not voting. Councillor Benny?
For.
Councillor Brisley?
Against?
Councillor Farmer?
Against.
Councillor Laurie?
Against.
Councillor MacDonald?
For.
Councillor Thompson?
Against.
Okay, so the amendment 4 votes to 2. Voting then on the motion, Councillor Benny?
Against.
Councillor Brisley?
For.
Sorry, Councillor Farmer?
For.
Councillor Laurie?
For.
Councillor MacDonald?
Against.
And Councillor Thompson?
For.
Okay, and the motion is carried by 4 votes to 2. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now on to item 15, Stirling Council Procurement Strategy 21-25 and Annual Procurement Report 2021. Who's taking us through this one? This hefty document, Isabel?
Nick Hyde, the Procurement Manager, will take us through this document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Nick?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Isabel. Nick Hyde, Head of Procurement. The paper in front of the committee this morning has 2 appendices, as you said, Chair. Procurement Strategy 21-25 and Appendix 2 is the Annual Procurement Report, both for consideration by committee this morning. If I take the first one, Procurement Strategy, this is a replacement for the existing procurement strategy, which ends this year. And what we've thought to do is A, to build on the success of the previous strategy, B, to align the strategy and the strategic aims for the procurement function in the next 4 years as heavily as possible with other council policies and plans, the 10-year plan, for instance, and the climate and nature emergency plan. The paper in front of committee covers the major changes from the previous strategy, and obviously as part of developing the strategy, it's been widely consulted on throughout the council. And I think I'm pleased to say that we had quite a good response from officers across the council in terms of feeding in through the survey, which is also included as an appendix to the procurement strategy, Appendix 1. Secondly is Appendix 2, the annual report. This is obviously covered by legislation. We have a legislative duty to publish an annual procurement report of activities during the last year. So the report details achievements throughout the year, and also I'd like to bring the committee's attention to Appendix 5 of the annual report, which outlines community benefits and sustainable outcomes, which I'm aware Councillor Brisley and other members of this committee have asked for previously. We've obviously done a lot of work in the interim and have developed the dashboards, which allows for now real-life tracking, and screenshots of those dashboards are included, and also a list of all contracts that we currently have that either have community benefits, sustainable outcomes, or in some instances both. I'll hand over to any comments or questions.
Thank you very much. A very comprehensive report. First of all, any questions? Jeremy?
Oh, Jim came in first.
Sorry?
Put his
Go
hand
ahead,
up
Jim.
first.
Jim?
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is a very interesting report. Unfortunately, the one thing that maybe is a criticism, you list the contractors, but you don't say where they're from. And my question is in relation to trying to get local companies work. And it's a very costly process, tendering. And I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can simplify the system to encourage local contractors, smaller contractors to tender for work, Nick?
Yes, Councillor, completely agree. So a lot of the strategy around community wealth building, around commercialisation, is going to be looking at local supply base, but also simplifying the process wherever we possibly can, to take the cost out, both for the council and for potential suppliers, really.
Okay. Jeremy now.
Thank you, Chair. In a similar vein, it was really about page 10 and how we grow that, but we have discussed at length before how we measure this locality element, and what I mean by that is how many local employees they have, how many local resources they use, etc. So what are we doing to look at that and fix that so that we are genuinely putting money back into the local economy?
Yes, thanks, Councillor MacDonald. Under the community wealth building banner, which is a subject matter which we brought to members of this committee earlier in the year, we currently measure, and the only way of currently measuring really is tier 1. Prime contractor, and we're able to see what we spend with those. I think there is an important element to look at local supply chains. There's also an important element to understand the makeup of those. And as part of community wealth building, I think the important thing is to look at, and Isabel and I have spoken a number of times about a local supplier forum. We've had those in the past as a council prior to me joining, but obviously were paused due to the pandemic. We want to resurrect those, but we also want to look at what worked really well with them in the past and look to strengthen those, and potentially bring in even more suppliers from the locality. Look at possibly working with organisations like Chamber of Commerce, etc., and casting our net as wide as we possibly can to make sure that we've got the right people in the room when we do things like supplier engagement forums.
That's brilliant. I think what I'm asking is basically, if there were two tenders and one actually had more local employees and one was actually using more local contractors and materials and things, that we would prefer that rather than the one that was just a national company that that got everything from somewhere else. That even if it was a national brand, that if it had some of that locality, that we really used that one. That's what I'm after, I think.
Yeah, I think we do need to get better at doing that, in terms of subcontracting opportunities and looking at where that, not just where the prime contractor is based, but also, in some contracts, if they're supplying local employment opportunities, local apprenticeships, etc., as part of the contract, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a national company if they're delivering community benefits around that locality as well. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Neil, you want to come in?
Yeah, before I get to my question, I wanted to commend you on this report. I don't remember seeing, maybe I missed it, but I don't remember seeing such a comprehensive annual procurement report with this long list of things in there. Maybe it's possible that that's been something we've been doing every year, and this is the first time I got really excited by it. But I think it's absolutely fantastic because it really kind of shows a really good discipline in terms of openness, transparency, and effort. And I really do commend the officers for that. Even if this is the 10th time that report's been done, and this is just the first time noticing it. I wanted to kind of just get under the skin a little bit on this local issue. One of the things that struck me and the issues with regards to the supplier forum, I think that's fantastic that you're doing that. That's great. I think the issues of tier 2 and tier 3 and contractors is a discussion which we will probably be having from now until the end of time, because it is a very complex and difficult issue. One thing I'd be interested in your take on, Nick, is something that's always struck me is, and it came from looking at one of the papers that Clackmannanshire Council had done on this, is that, you know, I mean, without mocking Clackmannanshire Council, they are quite small, and they tend to think that their local supplier chain is very small as well. So actually, they employ a lot of people from Stirling and from Falkirk, which is effectively local in many ways. Is there an intermediate local measure that we should be looking for here in terms of, you know, contractors who are based in Falkirk, Clackmannanshire, Dumbartonshire, Perth and Kinross, kind of that kind of within our immediate economic sort of sphere of influence, for want of a better term, without sounding like Vladimir Putin or anything like that, but within our sphere of influence of people who would that be something that would be easy to do? Would that be something which you think would be useful? Is that something that's done elsewhere?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. Again, completely agree. I think we're currently able to map spend with local Stirling companies and spend with Forth Valley. When you look at spend with local Stirling companies, we're around 16%. Forth Valley, it's up to 27%. I think it's an interesting question that we need to get in and around looking at and working closer with the other two councils within Forth Valley. And then, as you say, casting your net wider, because boundaries and geographical boundaries between councils can be very small at times in terms of one side of the road compared to the other side of the road, and where the individuals that are employed actually live is another question again. So yes, you know, I think we should and we will be looking at Forth Valley as a region more and more and tracking that. So in future years, we intend to be able to report on local Stirling and Forth Valley spend, so you can see a little bit more detail.
I think that's really useful, Nick. A related question. One of the things I would say about that is let's, you know, obviously the three old central regional Forth Valley councils are one thing, but then we do have Dumbartonshire is practically on our doorstep in terms of the west, and then up to Perth. I don't think the whole of Perthshire is necessarily on our doorstep, but there's probably a little bit more to it than just the Forth Valley. But I'll leave that with you to percolate. And it's really that thing on page 15 of your annual report, where you talk about the maximising collaborative opportunities, and we talk about that in the context of Scotland Excel, which is a great way of getting collaboration. But what I mean, I know that the collaboration opportunities is still an objective. Is there stuff that we can be doing beyond Scotland Excel to look at more significant collaboration with our neighbours in the context of more physical things, but then also nationally across the whole of the UK in terms of other collaborative elements in terms of digital? Because you know, I mean, there's no reason we can't. I mean, I know I don't want to sort of get into the enterprise resource system, but you know, I mean, if we were doing that in collaboration with Cornwall Council, it would be, you know, it wouldn't make such a huge difference to the project because it's digital. It can be anywhere. So that collaborative element. What's your next steps on that? Does it go beyond Excel?
Yes, it does. Is the short answer, Councillor. I think collaboration has to be something that we improve on. I think, you know, we as a council we're going in the right direction pre-pandemic, and then obviously, you know, a lot of plans have had to be put on the back burner just a little. But in terms of collaboration with wider councils, with other councils, you know, a Fife Council is not that far away from us, and Fife Council, when we looked at the data, actually spends a significant amount of money with Stirling-based companies across the year. So it's worth looking at that. And it's worth looking at that in whether or not there's collaborative opportunities with Fife Council, with Perth Council, and even wider, as you say. I think for me, part of the commercialisation agenda that's in the strategy is to look at opportunities at procurement strategy stage and see and improve how we gather data around collaboration and commercialization of our contracts at procurement strategy stage. There's always the challenge of resource. There's always an extra step. There's more work to be done in that area, but I think it will drive some benefit.
Okay, Isabel, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add another wee opportunity for us. I think in terms of our community wealth aspirations, Councillor Benny, I think the use of the anchor organisations and pulling that strength together will support local commercial organisations to access not just local contracts, but contracts out with the Forth Valley area. So the supplier development programme, we're engaging with the supplier development programme to try and support some of our local commercial organisations to access these bigger contracts through either subcontracting opportunities or having relationships with some of the larger organisations who are clearly in a much more, a better commercial position to win contracts, but they don't necessarily have the staff or the workforce or the expertise or the skill sets underneath in terms of the tiers. So that is something that the supplier development programme has been working on, particularly with the larger local authorities, but we've been kind of putting some pressure on them to help some of the smaller local authorities attract some commercial opportunities for local providers. It is quite a complex, you can imagine it's quite a complex web. However, I think the supplier development programme now accept that that's been a bit of a deficit in terms of their focus. So hopefully this time next year we may well come back with something that's more developed. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask, Isabel, what were the anchor organisations that you mentioned at the start there? I've not come across that before.
So anchor organisations are some of the big organisations that collaborate. So, for example, if we were thinking in Forth Valley, it could be Falkirk, Clarkson, Stirling, perhaps collaborating on a roads contract or gotcha. It's to gather that commercial attraction, but to allow for the smaller organisations to win in terms of some of the tier 2 and the tier 3 elements of a subcontracting opportunity. So that's kind of what community wealth brings. It tries to keep the money local, but for smaller organisations, it's more cost effective for us to do it together with bordering organisations. The health board would come into that.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant, but I just had not heard it described as that before. That's absolutely fine. One final question, and it's probably just a timescale thing, Chair, is just in terms of the reviewing the contract standing orders in terms of coming forward, because I know that there's often been some frustration, certainly expressed on my part, in terms of when, especially in larger contracts, councillors should be involved in the decision-making process for that, being moved to the front of the procurement process rather than the end of it. When it's where are we with that particular piece of work in terms of reviewing that?
That report has been reviewed, and that report will be on the pre-agenda this afternoon for council.
Is that for full council in December?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Lovely. Another report for full council in December. That's going to be a fun meeting. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So can we agree to approve the recommendations here?
Approved.
Agreed. Thank you. We're on to item 15 then. The whistleblowing policy.
Chair, apologies for interrupting. Just to note, the standing orders would require committee to take a brief comfort break after 2.5 hours of sitting, which we're just approaching. So it was just to note that with 2 items left on the agenda, whether this might be an appropriate time to take a brief comfort break. Thank you.
5 minutes then. Just 5 minutes, then we can get finished. Okay, so we'll come back at 25 to 1.
Chair, I think David's trying to get in.
David?
No, that's fine, Chair. Thank you. Graham, can you just check it's live on YouTube?
Graham. Thank you. Okay, we'll resume the meeting after our break.
Chair, do you want me to do a quick roll call just to
Quick
confirm?
roll call vote, yes.
Councillor Bennett?
I'm here.
Councillor Brisley?
Here.
Councillor Farmer?
Here.
Councillor Laurie?
Yeah, present.
Councillor MacDonald?
Yeah.
And Councillor Thompson?
Present.
Lovely. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We're on to item 16, the whistleblowing policy.
Thanks, Chair. It's Gordon O'Connor here, Audit Service Manager. As you say, the purpose of this paper is to present an updated whistleblowing policy. There haven't been any changes to the relevant legislation since the last time this policy was updated and approved back in February 2018. So this is very much a refresh of the policy rather than a fundamental rewrite. As I said at paragraph 2.3 in the covering report, the policy itself has been streamlined. A lot of the operational details have been taken out into a separate whistleblowing procedure, very much in the same way that Norman spoke about when he was describing the health and safety policy earlier in the meeting. The updated policy and the associated procedure are at Appendix 1 for members' information. You'll note that there's also an Appendix 2 to this report. The purpose or the intention with that appendix was to show the track changes between the previous and the current version, unfortunately. And with my apologies, that appears to have been lost in the PDF document. So I think for the purposes of this, we can disregard Appendix 2. Last thing probably is just to say, as per paragraph 2.4 of the covering report, the policy requires the Chief Officer Governance to provide a summary report on whistleblowing activity on an annual basis. And that report will go to Audit Committee at its meeting on the 27th of January. So I'll just finish by referring you to the recommendations, and if you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gordon. First of all, any questions to Gordon on the whistleblowing policy? Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very reassured by confidentiality. It's extremely important that the name of the person bringing that forward can feel confident about it remaining confidential. And I know, sadly, that doesn't always happen. One thing I did want to ask is, if somebody brings a complaint forward, if we feed back to them, it's kind of like the health and safety policy we were talking about earlier. Do we actually feed back to them that at least the issue has been addressed in some way?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Yes, we do. If the person making the complaint or raising the issue provides their contact details, then yes, they will be provided with limited information, it has to be said, because of confidentiality around particular individuals, etc. But yes, there will be feedback on the overall resolution, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Benny.
Yeah, on the same issue, Chair, in terms of feedback, I know from experience whistleblowing complaints can sometimes span years. If someone makes a whistleblowing complaint, which takes us a significant amount of time to investigate, Gordon, I'm always, whenever I suggest this sort of thing, I'm always reminded of if you've ever ordered a Domino's pizza. You get this little kind of wheel that comes up that tells you that your pizza order has been received, that the dough has gone in the oven, that they're spreading it. Whether it's true or not, it almost doesn't matter. It's quite a good way of telling people and feeding back to people that their order is being processed. With regards to the whistleblowing thing, is it your intention to have that kind of ongoing feedback when whistleblowing investigations are taking a long time, get back to people and say, we have not resolved your whistleblowing issue yet, it is still under investigation, at various intervals on that. I don't know what you think would be appropriate. It's obviously an operational matter, but I would like to understand what you're doing with that.
Yeah, no, of course, thank you. You see, as part of the policy, we are required to maintain a register of issues that are raised. As part of that register, we keep a detailed log of the stages that each matter has reached. As you say, Councillor Benny, for any which are taking perhaps longer than might be expected for whatever reason, then I think it would be reasonable to feed back on progress, because I think the whistleblowers taking the time, the trouble, and potentially some risk to bring the matter to our attention. So I think it's appropriate to communicate as appropriate, I guess. But yeah, I communicate and keep them updated if that's possible. So I think the answer to your question is yes, but it will be very much dependent on the timescale and the circumstances.
I think, Gordon, within that, I would say that it wouldn't necessarily always be appropriate. It would very seldomly be appropriate to go into the details of why there's been a delay, but certainly to say to people, your whistleblowing complaint is still active, would be enough of a feedback to someone. And like I say, I've been involved in a whistleblowing situation where this has been the case. They haven't had that feedback of, we're still investigating it, or actually it's still, we have heard you, we are listening to you, we will deal with it. Is really all it takes for people to feel like they're still involved. It doesn't need to be detailed, is all I'm saying.
Agreed.
Okay. If there's no further questions, and I don't see any other hands, do you agree to approve the 2 recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. And we're now on to item 17, which is developer contributions. Christina?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's Chris Cox, Planning and Building Standards Manager. So this will be quite brief. Members will recall that we've had the benefit of a briefing session. Certainly that was very helpful to us, and there was some good discussion that was had at it. As we set out in the report explains that this is the first report on developer contributions. It follows a review of our current systems to enable clearer and more specific reporting on an annual basis. But this should be viewed as the starting place for future more detailed reports. Appendix 1 outlines the receipt and spend over the period from 18-19 to 2021, and then projected spend from 21-22. And the projected spend clearly links to council corporate policies, for example, the local housing strategy. We also have Charlotte Brown on the line that can answer any detailed questions. Charlotte undertook this very substantial piece of work to be able to get to this, being able to report this today. And together we'll do our best to answer any questions. However, it may well be, if you've got any detailed questions around about spend, that we have to revert to the individual services concerned, and we'll certainly do that and come back to you. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the report? Jeremy?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, it's a good report, and thank you for starting this process. I think that's helpful. A couple of things I'd ask about: is there any deadlines on the money we need to spend, and is there any outstanding Section 75 money we're waiting for?
Yes, in most instances there will be a deadline for the money that requires to be spent. It will be very specific to the particular project to which it relates, and that's one of the critical pieces of work that Charlotte has been undertaking, is tracking through all and there are hundreds of Section 75s to which this relates to, tracking through what the periods of spend are. We haven't found anywhere where the time has expired, but we now have the confidence that we know what the time periods are, and that will be the subject of the quarterly monitoring that I mentioned, with the services, to make sure the services are aware that the timescales are coming up and they can plan their spend accordingly. And then, sorry, the second part of your question was?
Are we awaiting any Section 75 monies to come in?
No, not at this time. We're always we undertake it basically on a quarterly basis. So we are always going back retrospectively, but at this time there's not anything that we're aware of that's outstanding.
And a final question or comment I would make is, you'll be well aware of when there's a planning issue in a particular place, which is Section 75 comes up. Not always that the Section 75 goes directly back to that community, because it goes into a larger pot for various reasons. And I think it would be helpful to to somehow look at how we can put money back into those communities from these pots of money if we get them for certain situations, and communicate how that's being done. I don't know, that's quite a complicated question to ask, but how can we try and resolve that issue for them?
Yes, it's a good question. Currently, we're not. The job that we've been doing is really identifying what we've got and what's been spent. So we currently haven't got the mechanism yet that we're able to communicate that more widely. That certainly be a stage of work to move on to that we would wish to do, is to be identifying how much money has been received in the various communities and the projects that has been spent. So that's definitely on the work programme, but we're not quite there yet.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think that this is, I mean, we had the discussion about this at the briefing. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the points that I was raising there in terms of, I mean, I do think that when I look at this report on page 316, it says roads £151,080 and then £57,000 and changes. There have been various interventions designed to promote active travel, increase existing local road network and mitigate the impact of development. There is a level of detail which seems to be missing from that, and I think that this is something which, going forward, when we're taking on Section 75 agreements from developers, we probably need to be thinking about how do we hold ourselves accountable for the spend for that money in the context of, I'd quite like to see this report laid out with planning reference number of the planning application that dealt with the Section 75, with how much money was given for roads, education, play, affordable housing, or any other Section 75 monies that came into the council, and then that money allocated to specific projects so that we understand that. And I think that that's something, when we're going forward, I mean, obviously retrospectively trying to do that, it would just be a hellish nightmare of administrative, and I think, it's great to have got to this position so far. But I think that this is something that we need to keep in mind when we're going forward about being able to effectively account for this to the citizens who paid for this. Because, I mean, these are new Stirling citizens who effectively, because as I keep saying, and I've said this many times, developers do not pay Section 75 money. The people who buy the houses pay it, because the developers make their money anyway. So effectively, the people who paid money into this and bought something which is effectively, has this Section 75 agreement on it, they are the ones who, I think, should reasonably expect to see how that money is being spent and be able to relate it back. And I think I flippantly said at the briefing, we should write to them and tell them what we spent their money on. That's perhaps a level of sophistication which is entirely unnecessary. But I think going forward, that's the kind of level of accountability that's really needed in this kind of reporting. And I'm really glad we've got to this stage. I think that's the next stage after this. Probably more of a comment than a question, but I think I've inspired Drew to say something.
Drew.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Councillor Benny, as well. I think that level of detail around the transport, when I dived in last week to look at what that made up, there was various crossing points that had contributed to around Stirling to support active travel type things. So the next iteration, I think, we need to get to that point with a lot more detail. I think credit to Charlotte Brown, who's stuck on this task of sorting all this out and evidencing it over a lot of months. So, but I think we're in full agreement with you, and I think that'll be it'll be good that people can see exactly what's happening across Stirling with these contributions.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I think Neil makes a valid point in terms of how we can track it so that we can understand where the monies have come from in terms of planning gain and how it's been spent. You mentioned, Chris, that you were going to be having a quarterly monitoring, and I was wondering if that. I know you're planning an annual report to come to this committee, but in terms of the stats, are you envisaging that those quarterly monitoring stats would be reported to committee through the prior, in terms of the normal reporting procedure through performance and strategic priorities progress report, for example, there could be a section in that. The quarterly is reported in terms of the track spend, so that elected members are kept abreast of any particular issues or any particular concerns that come up. I just think it's important that we not only see it on an annual basis, but if it's been monitored quarterly, then if that could come through this committee as well.
I can't see any difficulty with that. It is our intention that we would be reporting to the Organisational Governance Board at some level in between committee, whether that's quarterly or biannually. I was just going to ask Charlotte, is there any, who's very close to the process, is there any shortcomings just in the practicalities of doing this in terms of how robust the data would be?
Hello, Charlotte Brown, Planning Officer. To answer your question, Councillor, no, there would be no problem with doing that. There may well be a slight delay with dealing with financial quarters, then a little bit of time processing that data and kind of matching up income to spend. So it may well fall potentially kind of a quarter behind, but there would be no kind of operational problems in tying those together that I can foresee at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I must admit, particularly if some of our big developments come off and start to be built, what was coming into my mind as well was I would like to know the progress, not just on an annual basis, but I had been thinking biannually, but if it can come quarterly, I would be quite happy with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Could I suggest that we work towards quarterly? We see where we get and then review whether that's the right time period or whether there's a different time period.
Yeah.
But could we say, instead of saying annually, say biannually at the moment?
Biannually, yep.
Yes. Do other members agree to that?
Yeah, I think we should have an annual report, Chair, but I think in terms of the monitoring the statistics, and the spend profile that could be done through the progress and priorities paper that comes to us at committee, the performance of strategic priorities. So we would still have the annual report, but we could still track the spend and get the information on a quarterly basis, so that we are kept abreast of developments.
Okay. Is that great? Now, one last.
Sorry, I was going to suggest that perhaps we could have a broader discussion about what we'd like to see reporting here, because you mentioned there, making reference to the major growth area and other developments, which obviously are of significant strategic interest to the council from an economic development point of view, as much as from a planning point of view. And then when we look at the kind of Section 75 monies in terms of what that's then being used for to enable that development, I wonder if there's a broader quarterly report that could perhaps satisfy both of those particular policy objectives, and whether it'd be worthwhile perhaps having an offline conversation.
Yes.
Between the group spokespeople and the officers, just to see what objectives we can all agree on in terms of reporting and what the timescale for that could be. So rather than necessarily commit to something now, have a chat about that offline.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm quite happy with that.
That's good. Yep.
Yes. Now, the last thing I want to do, and I'm not sure if he's still here, is Jim Boyle still here?
I'm here, Chair, yeah.
That's fine, Jim. I just wanted to acknowledge this is Jim's last meeting of Finance and Economy Committee. Unfortunately, Jim's decided to go away to pastures new. And I've got to congratulate you on the new position you've got, Jim, but also like to thank you for all the work and effort you've put into ensuring that our finances have been kept on track over how many years is it now? 30 odd years? You've been
Don't say it
working
like
with the councils. So I just really to acknowledge your contribution, particularly within our committee, and I want to thank you personally for all the help and support you've given me over my time as convener of the committee. So thank you very much, Jim, for all your help and support. And all the best. Good wishes to you in your new venture. I'm sure it's going to a total change for you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't expecting that, but I very much appreciate that. Thank you. I've enjoyed working with so many people over the years, including the people on this committee, and yeah, I'll take away many very fond memories of Stirling, both officers and members and others. So I thank you very much for that, Margaret, and I wish everyone all the success in future.
Cheers, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So with that, finish on a nice note today, and thank you all very much for your attendance at the meeting this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.